member leans heavily to the right at this point, heard nearly 5 hours of oral arguments in 2 cases seeking to end what's referred to as race-conscious college admissions, otherwise known as affirmative action. Now, the 2 cases involve Harvard and the University of North Carolina. And in both cases, the plaintiffs argued that the admissions process discriminates against white and Asian American applicants while giving priority to Black, Hispanic, and Native American applicants. Now, I should note that this is the 4th time, literally the 4th time that the Supreme Court has heard challenges to race-conscious admissions. And Ed Blum is the conservative attorney who has really led this mission to reverse affirmative action. What makes things different now is that the Supreme Court is leaning heavily to the right, with the majority of Supreme Court justices, identifying as conservative justices. So it's pretty likely that this court will reverse, previous precedent on affirmative action next year. That is when their ruling is expected to happen. Now, during the oral arguments, Justice Clarence Thomas, who's been on the record as someone who is against affirmative action, asked questions that kind of give us a preview into what we can expect next year when they finally hand down their ruling. Let's take a look at that.
This is Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, the only conservative justice of color, questioning the lawyer representing University of North Carolina, Ryan Park.
I didn't go to racially diverse schools, but there were educational benefits. And I'd like you to tell me expressly, when a parent sends a kid to college, that they don't necessarily send them there to have fun or feel good or anything like that. They send them there to learn physics or chemistry or whatever they're studying. So tell me what the educational benefits are.
So there's Justice Thomas minimizing the educational benefits of learning in a diverse environment where you have exposure to different cultures, people from all sorts of different backgrounds. He just doesn't really see the value in that. And he essentially minimizes it by drawing this weird comparison or equivalence to just having fun in college. But as we know, that diversity does add to the educational experience on college campuses. I'm curious what you think, David, because legacy admissions never really get challenged, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But just based on what you're expecting next year with the SCOTUS ruling.
Well, a couple of things. Because Justice Thomas rarely speaks from the bench, when he does, it's usually something that he feels very strongly about. So I think you can guarantee that he's gonna either write the opinion or he's gonna certainly support an opinion that gets rid of affirmative action. I just unfortunately don't see the math working out for those of us who support affirmative action. To me, and again, this is something the court has been chipping away at for years, by going after the UNC, by going after Harvard. Again, it's public universities, it's private universities, and I have a feeling the courts are gonna say no more affirmative action whatsoever in college admissions. And that's a crying shame, because it's not just about whether somebody is qualified to learn physics. It's about the experience of exchanging ideas, learning from people who have a different background, a different race, a different religion, a different set of life circumstances. All of that comes together to enrich the college experience in a way that you can't possibly replace. And I'll just say, I went to the University of Michigan. I was so grateful that they had affirmative action, because it increased my exposure to a lot of students that I might not have already had the opportunity to meet and learn from. And so I think it's another slam on the way society is going. And I find it regretful.
I find it regretful for the reasons you mentioned, but also because of the fact that, while race might have a lot to do with educational inequality, socioeconomic status is also a pretty good indicator of how some students are really left behind. So if we're gonna have a discussion about meritocracy, for instance, we also have to consider the fact that not everyone begins on an equal footing, right? There are deep issues with the way public education is funded in this country. It's no surprise that schools that exist in poor neighborhoods tend to be severely underfunded. That's partly because of the fact that public education is funded through property taxes. And if the properties in a neighborhood have lower value because it might be a poorer neighborhood, the schools in that neighborhood get far less funding. And so, we're having a discussion about this as if everyone has the same start. And we just want to make sure that the most qualified students are able to get admitted into these universities. But the fact of the matter is not everyone has an equal start. And I think it's important to give people who might not come from a wealthy neighborhood an opportunity to better their lives, by getting admitted into these colleges, right? Anyway, so that's another issue I have. I mean, it's the same thing with standardized testing.
Well, that's the thing. Standardized testing, right? They've got rid of SATs because they found that it's not a very good predictor of academic success.
Right.
And standardized tests, again, if you're willing to say, look, we've realized we've come a long way in terms of realizing what is a predictor of academic success, and that we shouldn't write off people because of certain schools that they went to, or certain neighborhoods, or certain communities that they grew up in. And that's the whole point, right? It's universities saying, look, we are willing to go ahead and take a chance. We're willing to extend an olive branch to a community that has traditionally been disenfranchised, because we believe that despite whatever sort of terrible education they got or socioeconomic status they have, that they will still contribute to the education of everybody at the university. And that's the point that I think too many conservatives seem to miss.
Exactly. Well, I want to also just talk about how socioeconomic status certainly plays a huge role when it comes to legacy admissions, which should be considered far more controversial than affirmative action, because legacy admissions don't have anything to do with merit. They have nothing to do with improving the educational experience on various campuses, but it does have everything to do with giving individuals who happen to have privilege or come from privileged families even more privilege by making their admissions process far more easier. And far more easy, I should say. And so Imani Oakley, who's a reporter for TYT, put together a great video kind of explaining what legacy admissions are and why they should be done away with. Let's watch.
Legacy admissions are when colleges and universities consider the alumni status of an applicant's parents or other relatives during the admissions process. Those applicants, known as legacies, are more likely to be accepted, and the practice favors mostly white and affluent students. Why isn't the Supreme Court looking to outlaw legacy admissions too? Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas has even argued that affirmative action is a tool of white supremacy that elevates white people to the status of benefactors, doling out scarce privileges to black people that they deem worthy. But if the purpose of legacy admissions is to help, at least in part, fund low-income students, doesn't this still put rich, mostly white people in the position of benefactor for people with less privilege? If so, why wouldn't Clarence Thomas and the rest of the conservatives on the Supreme Court want to get rid of it?
Yeah, why not? Why not? And again, if you're gonna make this case that admission should solely be based on merit and factors such as someone's socioeconomic status or race should not be considered or weighed into the decision, then legacy admissions absolutely should be done away with. And I should note, in terms of affirmative action, there's this talking point that's completely inaccurate, and it's regurgitated over and over again by the right wing. And that talking point is that people who are not qualified, students who are not qualified to be admitted into these universities get admitted simply because of their race. That is not how the admissions process is calculated. Race, for the universities who do consider race in the admissions process, weigh that along with a whole host of other factors. Oftentimes, these are students who are incredibly bright, who certainly have the test scores and the grades that would merit admissions into these universities. It's just that their race might give them a little bit of an edge over another student who might have similar test scores, similar grades, but doesn't come from a disadvantaged background. You see what I'm saying? So I wanted to kind of clarify that because I think intentionally there's a lot of misinformation going around about how affirmative action works.
Related to that, I guarantee one thing that is given a lot of weight, far more than race or SATs or anything, are these legacies. If you've got your grandfather and father went to school and maybe they've got a building named after them, I guarantee that student can be a C student from high school. They will get into Harvard or Yale if they've got a lot of money, if they're a legacy family. Do they deserve to be there? No, based on all the credentials and everything that conservatives suggest, they should not be allowed in. It shouldn't be because you have a legacy. It shouldn't be because your grandfather gave a lot of money to the university. And yet the problem that we see here, and I love, we were talking about this before the show, and you said, yeah, but this isn't really gonna go anywhere. And it's not, because there's not an advocacy for. There's not a constituency saying, get rid of legacies. It's about fairness for all of us, but it's not as if there's some group saying, oh yeah, let's get rid of legacy admissions. And who's saying that other than people who are saying it on an intellectual basis?
And there is something that viewers over at TYT can do. We're trying to lead the effort in having these legacy admissions challenged. And so we have a petition up on our website. So let's take a quick look at that. Just we want to tell Congress to lose the legacy. And you can participate in this petition by going to tyt.com/petitions/lose the legacy. Again, that's tyt.com/petitions/lose the legacy. Make your voice heard, sign the petition, show that there is widespread support to, be fair in the system. If universities are not going to be allowed to weigh the background that some of these students are coming from in making their decision, then they certainly should not give the children of former alumni, or alumni, I should say, a leg up in these admissions. One thing that I wanted to also read is, I don't know if this is a joke or if the person writing this is being serious, but one of our viewers wrote in and said, nah, legacy admissions are fine. I mean, my family benefited from it, so let's keep it, right? But that's honestly the kind of thinking we see from conservatives when it comes to this issue. So whether it's a joke or not, it's definitely indicative of the thought process that we've been seeing.
Right, and using their own thought process, if affirmative action is bad for the people who are admitted because maybe they're given some sort of stigma. Oh, you only got into college because of your background or your race. Well, let's apply that then also to legacies. This would be very bad for somebody to be attending a college only because if their father went there, their grandfather, their mother, whoever it is, that would be bad because that student would be stigmatized. So if conservatives are really concerned about the stigma, then let's apply that across the board and make sure there's no stigma for anybody, that everybody is getting in based on their own sort of merit or whatever university says, not based on who their relatives are.